My wife installed the app at midnight, with the careful silence of someone who had practiced betrayal long before she ever touched the phone. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow cupped in her hands, and that glow moved across her face in uneven pulses, making her look less like the woman I had slept beside for 22 years, and more like a stranger sitting at the edge of my bed wearing my wife's skin. I was supposed to be asleep. That was the assumption she had built the whole thing on. Henry Holloway, exhausted after a 12-hour day in Manhattan, predictable Henry with his early train and his evening reports, and his habit of leaving his Samsung on the same walnut nightstand every night, would be too tired to hear the soft shift of bedsheets, too trusting to notice the small pause in his wife's breathing, too domestica. Ted by marriage to imagine that the person beside him might be waiting for his body to go limp, so she could reach across him and open the door to his financial life. But I was awake. I had not meant to be awake. Some instinct had pulled me out of sleep without sound or reason, a primitive warning traveling through years of shared routine. At first I thought she was checking the weather or scrolling through one of the home decorating pages she pretended not to care about. Then I saw my own lock screen reflected in the tall mirror across from the bed, and every part of me went still. Her fingers moved with a confidence she had never shown around technology in daylight. This was the same Margaret who asked me twice a month how to reset the router, the same Margaret who sighed dramatically when the smart television updated, the same Margaret who claimed apps were all designed to make people feel stupid. Yet there she was at 17 in the morning, angling my phone away from my face, lowering the brightness, swiping through menus, entering a passcode she was not supposed to know, then opening a browser window from a hidden tab. She was not fumbling. She was not guessing. She was following instructions. Her thumb paused sometimes, but only to read. Her lips moved once, silently counting through steps. Install. Allow. Accessibility permissions. Device administrator. Notifications hidden. The words were too small for me to read directly, but I could see enough in the rhythm of her movement to understand that she was not checking messages. She was putting something inside my phone, something meant to remain there after she slid it back onto the nightstand and returned to her pillow as if nothing had happened. I kept my eyes narrowed, barely open, my breathing slow and heavy, the same fake sleep I had used once as a child when my father checked on me after I broke a lamp. It felt obscene to pretend in my own bed. Marriage is built from thousands of permissions you stop naming, because they become atmosphere. You let someone see you tired. You let someone hear your fears. You leave your phone on the nightstand. You sign tax returns. You share passwords in emergencies. You believe proximity is safety, because the alternative would make daily life impossible. Watching Margaret violate that quiet trust did not feel dramatic in the moment. It felt cold, slow, like hearing a pipe freeze inside the walls and knowing the burst was coming later. When she finished, she did something that stayed with me more than the installation itself. She held the phone for 1 second in both hands and smiled. Not a wide smile, not enough to be seen by someone who was not already watching closely. Just a small tightening at one corner of her mouth, a private satisfaction, a person closing a drawer after placing something dangerous inside. Then she wiped the screen with the edge of the sheet, set the phone precisely where I always left it, turned away from me and sighed into the pillow. Within minutes, her breathing settled into the familiar rhythm I had known for more than 2 decades. I remained awake until dawn, lying beside the woman who had just planted surveillance software on my device, listening to the heating system hum through the vents of our Westfield house, staring at the ceiling while every year of our marriage rearranged itself in my mind. I had always thought I knew Margaret. That was the arrogance of long marriage, the lazy confidence that repetition is the same thing as knowledge. I knew she took coffee with 2 sugars and no milk. I knew she hummed Beatles songs when folding towels, always slightly off-key. I knew she hated cilantro, loved expensive candles, pretended to enjoy my office parties, and never admitted when she was wrong until 3 days after the argument, when she would do something kind instead of apologizing. I knew the soft dent her body made on her side of the mattress. I knew the way grief had collapsed her shoulders when her father died, and I knew the way she had held my hand at my mother's funeral, with the practical firmness of someone anchoring me to the earth. I knew her habits. I knew her preferences. I knew the version of her that daily life had given me. What I did not know, and what I could not stop thinking as morning light bled pale through the curtains, was whether the woman I knew had been real or merely the surface, that 22 years of routine had allowed me to mistake for depth. The morning after the installation, she made scrambled eggs and wheat toast. That almost broke me, not because it was unusual, but because it was not. The kitchen smelled of butter and coffee. The small radio on the counter played a traffic report. Margaret stood at the stove wearing the grey robe I bought her 5 Christmases ago, humming Yesterday under her breath, while she folded eggs with the same wooden spatula she always used. She turned when I entered and smiled in the gentle, domestic way I had depended on for years. "You look tired," she said, placing a plate in front of me. "Bad sleep." I looked at her hands. They had held my phone in the dark. Now they held a coffee mug. The ordinariness of the transition felt monstrous. "A little," I said. "Work on my mind." She clicked her tongue with practiced sympathy. "You push too hard, Henry. One day that office is going to grind you into dust." Then she kissed my cheek, as if she had not spent 15 minutes opening my life while I lay beside her pretending not to know. On the train to Manhattan, I sat in my usual window seat and watched the suburbs blur past under a grey March sky. Men in wool coats read financial news. A woman across the aisle answered emails with the fast irritation of someone already behind. The train rocked gently, the same route I had taken for years, but nothing about the morning felt stable. My phone sat in my coat pocket like a live thing. I wanted to throw it under the tracks. I wanted to open it and search every app. I wanted to call Margaret and ask her what she had done, to hear her lie while the installation was still fresh. Instead, I sat still and let the city draw closer, because one thing 30 years in finance had taught me was that panic destroys evidence faster than enemies do. By lunch, I was in a small electronics repair shop on 42nd Street, standing under fluorescent lights beside shelves of refurbished tablets and phone cases, explaining to a technician barely old enough to have a mortgage that my wife might have installed something on my phone while I slept. Saying it out loud made me feel foolish, then ashamed of feeling foolish. The technician, a thin young man named Eli with thick glasses and a calm face, did not laugh. He nodded in the grave way of people who have seen enough private disasters to know they rarely arrive in dramatic packaging. "Happens more than you'd think," he said. "Most people come in after money is already gone." He connected my phone to a laptop, ran a scan, then another one. His face changed on the second scan. The professional neutrality tightened into interest. "This is not a jealous spouse checking texts," he said. "This is commercial-grade monitoring software. Hidden process, keystroke capture, screen capture, banking overlays, location logs, message mirroring. Whoever installed this wanted financial credentials." I heard the words, but they did not become real immediately. They hovered. Financial credentials, banking overlays. My office overlooked Central Park. I handled complex investment structures, acquisitions, audited risk exposure for people who trusted me with numbers large enough to alter lives. I knew theft. I knew fraud. I knew the smell of it in spreadsheets and nervous conference calls. But fraud in a marriage bed is different. It does not arrive with a suspicious invoice or a shell company address. It arrives wearing the robe you bought it, humming over breakfast. "Can you remove it?" I asked. Eli shook his head. "If I remove it cleanly, it may send an alert. Some of these programs notify the controller when tampered with. But I can sandbox it, feed it false data, protect the real entries. It will keep thinking it is watching you while I route it into a decoy environment." He looked up. "That means whoever installed it will still believe it works." I stared at my phone. "Do it?" Eli worked for nearly an hour. While he typed, I thought about every small moment I had dismissed in the last year. Margaret asking whether I still used the same password manager. Margaret lingering in the doorway of my study when I paid bills. Margaret telling me I seemed distracted, then asking whether I had any big accounts maturing soon. Margaret joking that if I ever died suddenly, she would not know where anything was. At the time, I had found those moments practical, maybe even loving. Now each one changed shape. Reconnaissance disguised as marriage. Curiosity wearing the mask of concern. When I returned home that evening, Margaret was making pot roast with carrots and potatoes, one of my favorites. The house smelled like Sunday, though it was Wednesday. And for one terrible moment, I wanted the technician to have been wrong. I wanted there to be an explanation so absurd and innocent that I could laugh at myself and confess my paranoia and let her scold me for wasting money on a phone scan. Then she looked up from the stove and said, "I was thinking we should take a vacation soon. Somewhere warm, or maybe Europe. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We could do a whole tour. Her voice was light, but her eyes watched me too carefully. The timing was too exact. The app was in place. She believed she had access. Now she was testing the fantasy aloud. Europe, I said, hanging my coat. That sounds expensive. She stirred the gravy slowly. We could afford it now, couldn't we? You have worked so hard, saved so much. Maybe it is time we enjoyed some of it. She smiled, and behind the smile was an appetite I had never allowed myself to name. For 3 weeks, I lived inside 2 marriages. In one, Margaret and I still ate dinner, discussed her sister's birthday, argued mildly about the dishwasher, watched television, while she leaned against the opposite end of the couch. In the other, I watched her watch me. She stayed up later, claiming insomnia, her phone reflecting in the bedroom mirror. She asked when I had meetings, whether I would travel, whether my firm required 2-factor authentication for personal accounts, whether I still kept emergency passwords in the old folder in my desk. She became affectionate in strange bursts, touching my shoulder while I read, kissing me longer before work, telling me she loved me with a pressure that felt less like devotion than punctuation. Each kindness had weight now. Each question had teeth. I did not confront her. That restraint cost me more than I expected. Some nights I stood in the bathroom with the faucet running, gripping the sink, whispering arguments I would not have. I imagined waking her, holding the phone up, demanding truth. I imagined her crying, confessing loneliness, blaming my hours, blaming our childlessness, blaming menopause, blaming the dry rot of routine. I imagined forgiving her before she even asked, because 22 years is not a light thing to throw into fire. Then I would remember her smile in the phone glow. Not desperate, not wounded, satisfied. And I would return to bed beside her, careful not to let my body touch hers. Meanwhile, under legal guidance I had already secured, I built the stage she thought she had built for me. The account she believed she was seeing became a decoy, connected to a business structure designed to record every unauthorized access and route every transaction into documentation rather than loss. The balance was there for her to see because I wanted her to see it. The passwords she captured opened what I wanted opened. The real accounts, the investments she did not know existed, the assets I had quietly separated over the past year after noticing inconsistencies in household spending, remained untouched. I did not feel clever. I felt tired. There is no triumph in preparing for someone you loved to rob you. There is only the slow disgust of measuring how far you think they will go and discovering they are willing to go farther. The morning she moved, she made pancakes with real maple syrup. She had not made pancakes in months. She wore the cream blouse I once told her made her look younger, and she touched my tie before I left for the station. "You work too much," she said softly. "Promise me you will try to leave early today." Her hands rested on my chest. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and powdery she had started wearing recently. "I will try," I said. She smiled, leaned up, and kissed me. It lasted long enough to feel like goodbye. Not goodbye to a husband she loved, goodbye to a man she believed she had beaten. At 10:42 that morning, while I sat in my office pretending to review quarterly projections, the first alert came. $400,000 transferred from the decoy account to an external account I did not recognize. Then smaller transfers, 10,000, 25,000, 40. Money moved through channels with the speed of preparation. Margaret was not improvising. She had accounts ready. She had pathways. She had help. Every movement appeared on my secure dashboard, recorded, time-stamped, preserved. My chest felt hollow as I watched. There was no satisfaction in being right. There was only the death of the last foolish hope that she might stop before crossing the final line. At 2:31, the first message came. A photograph of a first-class boarding pass to Paris. Then a second photograph of champagne in an airport lounge. Then the text, "Thanks to your mobile, I am really enjoying spending your $400,000. I stared at the words until they blurred. She had not simply stolen. She wanted me to know. She wanted the wound to be conscious. She wanted me sitting at my desk imagining her in motion, imagining accounts emptied, imagining myself too late, too stupid, too trusting. The theft was financial. The message was intimate. More photos followed before evening. Margaret in a luxury airport lounge with sunglasses perched on her head. Margaret holding a shopping bag from a boutique I recognized, only because clients' wives sometimes wore the brand. Margaret's hand around a crystal flute, a room key from a five-star hotel, then messages. The suite is $1,200 a night, worth every penny of your money. This necklace was $15,000. Thank you for being such a generous husband. Dinner tonight at a Michelin restaurant. The wine alone costs more than your monthly train pass. Each message was designed with care. She knew which details would humiliate me. She knew I was practical. She knew I compared value. She knew the train pass line would find the part of me that had spent decades being careful, delaying pleasure, building stability. She was not spending blindly. She was narrating my supposed ruin. By the second day, I noticed the man. At first, he was only a reflection in the hotel window behind her. Tall, dark-haired, holding a glass. Then a shoulder at the edge of a restaurant photograph. Then his hand on the table beside hers. Then half his face reflected in a polished elevator door. Margaret was careless because she felt victorious. Or perhaps she wanted me to see him. That possibility entered me slowly. She was not only announcing theft, she was announcing replacement. A younger man with an easy smile, expensive watch, and the relaxed posture of someone spending money he did not earn. I printed every image. I sent copies to my attorney. I saved originals. I did all the things a rational man does, while the irrational part of him watches 22 years of marriage dine under Paris lights with another man. On Thursday evening, she sent a video. I almost did not open it. I had already seen enough, but evidence has its own gravity, and some masochistic part of me needed to hear her voice without the domestic mask. She sat on a balcony overlooking the Eiffel Tower, wine glass in hand, hair loose, face bright with triumph. The man sat beside her now, fully visible, leaning back with a grin he did not bother hiding. "This is for my husband Henry," Margaret said, lifting the glass. Her voice was lightly drunk, but not sloppy. Cruelty sharpened it. "The man who worked so hard to make all this possible. Henry, darling, if you are watching this, I want you to know that every penny of your $400,000 has been absolutely worth it. You always said I should travel more, see the world. Well, thanks to your generosity, I finally can." She turned toward the man beside her and laughed. "To Henry, the most generous ex-husband a girl could ask for." Ex-husband. The word landed quietly. She had already divorced me in her mind. Perhaps months ago. Perhaps the first night she let him touch her. Perhaps the first time she opened my banking app and imagined a life funded by my absence. I watched the video twice, not because I enjoyed pain, but because the second viewing allowed me to detach from the first. First as husband, then as witness. On the second viewing, I saw what the prosecutor would see. Intent, mockery, knowledge, lack of remorse, the accomplice, the wine, the timestamp, the location data, the statement connecting the funds to me. Margaret had turned herself into evidence because she needed to feel powerful. That was the mistake. Greed can be careful, but vanity wants applause. When she returned a week later, I picked her up at Newark Airport. She had asked me to, not asked, really instructed, as if the old routines still existed for her convenience. I went because I wanted the moment unfiltered. I wanted to see the face she wore when she believed the damage was done. She emerged from customs tanned and radiant, wearing a camel coat I had never seen, and a silk scarf tied carelessly at her throat. Her luggage was designer and excessive. She moved with a new lightness, the kind people have when they think consequence belongs to someone else. The man from Paris was not with her. He had taken a different flight or vanished earlier. I wondered if she knew yet which. "Hello, Henry," she said, sliding into the passenger seat without kissing my cheek. "Miss May." "Every day," I said. She smiled at the window. "I imagine you did." The drive to Westfield unfolded like a confession she did not know she was making. She talked about Paris with cruel casualness, naming restaurants, hotels, boutiques, describing a private shopping appointment as if I should be impressed by the efficiency of my own humiliation. She mentioned the hotel balcony. She mentioned the wine. She did not mention the man, and the omission sat between us like another passenger. "Sometimes," she said as the suburbs thickened around us, "you need to step away from your old life to understand what you really want." "And what do you want?" She turned to me. The warmth was gone. The mask had no reason to return now. "Freedom. I want to stop pretending this marriage has been anything but a financial arrangement for the last 5 years. The honesty should have hurt more. Instead, it confirmed a death that had already happened. When did you decide that?" She laughed softly, probably around the time you stopped noticing I existed, except as someone to keep the house functioning. I almost answered. I almost told her about every dinner invitation she declined, every weekend I suggested away, every conversation she ended with a headache, every time I reached for her and found only air dressed as a wife. But there was no point. People rewriting history are not looking for editors. At home, she rolled her luggage into the foyer and looked around the house like a buyer assessing resale value. "We need to discuss practical matters," she said in the kitchen, pouring herself wine from a bottle she had brought back. "Divorce, division of asset. The house will need to be sold, obviously. With your savings gone, you cannot carry it alone, but I am not completely heartless. I will make sure you get enough to find a decent apartment somewhere. Maybe not Manhattan, of course, but somewhere manageable." I sat across from her at the table where we had eaten thousands of meals. "That is generous." "I thought so," she sipped. "You are taking this better than expected. I thought there would be more begging." I stood and retrieved the folder from the counter. "I suppose I should thank you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Thank me for showing me who you are, and for documenting the theft so thoroughly." Her face changed, not much but enough. A small freeze around the eyes. "Theft? $400,000 transferred last Wednesday, followed by 7 days of photos, messages, videos, receipts, and location data showing exactly how you spent it." I opened the folder and spread printed images across the table. "Paris, champagne, necklace, balcony." Her smile repeated in glossy fragments. "These will be excellent evidence." For the first time, uncertainty entered her posture. "Henry, don't be ridiculous. It was in your account. We are married. Marital assets are shared. Using marital assets is not theft," I said. "You are right." She relaxed half an inch. "But that is not what happened." I placed the bank documents on top of the photographs. "The account you accessed was not my personal savings. It was a decoy business account, connected to a loan structure flagged for monitoring after suspected unauthorized access. I created the environment after I discovered the spyware you installed on my phone." Her wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "What?" "I watched you install it, Margaret." The glass lowered slowly. "No." "Yes." "No, you were asleep." "I was not." Her face drained. The past 3 weeks moved through her eyes as she recalculated every conversation, every password, every screen capture she thought she had stolen cleanly. "You set me up," she whispered. "I protected myself. You made that money available. I made false information visible to an illegal monitoring app installed without my consent. You chose to use it." She stood so fast the chair scraped backward. "You cannot prove I installed anything. The technician can, the logs can, the software can, the access records can, your messages can, your video can. James can if he decides prison is less attractive than cooperation." At the name, she flinched. There he was. "James has nothing to do with this." "That is not what the photographs suggest." Her mouth opened, closed. She reached for the wine glass and missed. It fell shattered on the white tile, red wine spreading outward like a wound neither of us moved to clean. "Here is the part you may want to sit down for," I said. She remained standing. "The money you moved triggered a fraud investigation. The loan documentation connected to that account was never finalized. The funds should never have been legally dispersed in the way you accessed them. That means you did not drain my savings. You created a federal financial event tied to unauthorized access, wire transfers, and misappropriation of funds attached to your own identifying information." Her lips parted. "What does that mean?" "It means you did not steal my future. You built your own indictment." She sat, not gracefully, not like Margaret. She dropped into the chair, as if the bones behind her knees had been cut. "Henry, please." There it was, the first please. Not before installing the app, not before transferring money, not before boarding first class, not before sending the balcony video. Please arrived only when consequences did. "We can fix this," she said. "We have been married 22 years. "No, we were married 22 years. You ended it before Paris." I was confused. "You were detailed." I was lonely. "You were cruel." I made a mistake. I looked at the photographs on the table, at her laughing face multiplied across them. No, you made a plan. The first calls began the next morning. Banks, fraud departments, credit issuers, an investigator from a financial crimes unit. Margaret had moved to the guest room during the night, after trying unsuccessfully to scrub wine from grout. I heard her voice through the wall, shifting from irritation to fear. What do you mean frozen? All of them? No, there must be some mistake. I need access to those accounts. I have automatic payments. Pause. No, you cannot just freeze everything. Longer pause. Investigation into what? By 7:30 she entered the kitchen wearing no makeup, her Paris glow already dimmed. They froze my accounts. I read the newspaper. All of them, she said, as if the second sentence might produce sympathy where the first had failed. That was fast. You reported me. I did not need to. Banks notice unusual movement of large sums, especially through multiple accounts connected to irregular loan documentation. She stared at me with exhausted hatred. You sound like you are giving a presentation. I have had practice. The day became a cascade of collapse. The mortgage auto payment failed. Her credit cards locked. Her Mercedes lease flagged. The country club called about dues. A boutique in Paris emailed concerning an issue with a transaction authorization. Each call stripped away another piece of the life she believed she had secured. What surprised me was not the collapse, but how quickly her confidence sought new hosts. First, she blamed the bank, then me, then the technician she did not know existed, then James, though not yet allowed. By noon, James called. She took it in the dining room, perhaps thinking distance would give privacy. I heard enough. James, I need you to tell me what is happening. Pause. No, do not say that. Pause. You said we had a plan. Pause. What do you mean you never promised anything? Her voice cracked. James, please. I did this for us. Longer silence. Then small and humiliating. Did you ever love me? I did not hear his answer, but I saw it on her face when she returned. There are rejections that wound pride. Then there are rejections that reveal the entire fantasy was a transaction. Margaret had thrown away a marriage for a man who had simply recognized in her what she recognized in me. Access. He is gone, she said. Yes, you knew he would live. I suspected. She looked at me then, and for one instant I saw not the thief, not the mocker, not the woman on the balcony, but a person standing in the ruins of a self-image. It did not soften me. It only made the room sadder. A knock came at 1:18. Two agents in dark suits stood on the porch. They were polite, official, and immune to domestic theater. They had a warrant for Margaret's arrest on charges of wire fraud, unauthorized access, money laundering, and theft exceeding $100,000. They had a search warrant for devices and documents. Margaret turned toward me as they read her rights, and the look on her face was the final form of betrayal. Not remorse, accusation, as if I had wronged her by allowing consequences to arrive. Henry, she whispered, do something. I thought of the app, the transfers, Paris, the video, the toast to her generous ex-husband. I already did. They took her down the front walk. The neighbors' curtains moved. Margaret did not look at them. She looked back at the house once, then at me. This is not over, she said. She was right. It took 9 months to reach trial, and those 9 months were a different kind of prison. Depositions, legal filings, divorce proceedings, reporters sniffing around after the indictment became public, because middle-aged suburban wife steals phantom fortune had just enough absurdity to attract attention. Margaret's attorney tried entrapment, emotional neglect, marital confusion, diminished judgment under manipulation by James Crawford. Each defense had a piece of truth twisted into shield shape. Had I created the decoy? Yes. Had our marriage been hollow? Yes. Had James manipulated her? Yes. But none of that changed the central fact. She had installed the app. She had moved the money. She had celebrated my presumed ruin in writing. The trial was held in federal court in New York. Margaret looked smaller in person than she did in memory. Prison grayness had entered her skin. The expensive polish was gone, replaced by a plain suit that did not fit right and hair pulled back too tightly. I sat in the gallery and watched prosecutors display the photographs she had sent me. The images that once felt like knives now became exhibits. The suite, the necklace, the restaurant, the balcony video. Her voice filled the courtroom. Henry, darling, if you are watching this, I want you to know that every penny of your $400,000 has been absolutely worth it." Jurors watched without expression, but I saw the shift. People understand theft. They understand affairs. What they do not easily forgive is joy taken in another person's suffering. James testified on the fourth day. He wore a suit too good for his character and answered questions with the practical cowardice of a man who had calculated that honesty served him now. He said Margaret showed him screenshots. He said she wanted to leave me but feared losing lifestyle. He said she promised him money. He said she called me predictable, trusting, dull enough to miss what happened under my nose. When Margaret's attorney asked whether he loved her, he looked at Margaret, then the jury. "No," he said. "I saw an opportunity." "So did she." Margaret cried then, quietly. "Not for me, not for the crime, for herself perhaps, or for the last illusion falling." The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing 6 weeks later, the judge spoke in a voice that carried no theatrical anger, which made it worse. "Mrs. Holloway, this court is not merely troubled by the financial sophistication of the crime. It is troubled by the evidence of pleasure. You did not act in panic. You did not act in one impulsive moment. You planned, executed, marked, documented, and celebrated. You attempted to turn intimacy into a weapon and marriage into access. 15 years. Restitution exceeding $600,000 after fees, penalties, and interest. Possibility of parole after 10 years contingent on conditions she was unlikely to meet. Margaret did not look back when they led her away. I was grateful. I did not know what face I would have made if she had. Freedom did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived first as silence. I sold the Westfield house 6 months later to a young couple with twins. The wife loved the kitchen. She said it felt like a place where a family could grow. I did not tell her what had happened on the tile. I wished her well and left the keys on the counter. My new apartment in Manhattan overlooked Central Park from the 32nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the rooms with light. Margaret had hated bright rooms. She said they gave her headaches. Now I wondered whether she simply preferred shadows. For months I lived carefully, almost clinically. I bought furniture alone. I learned what I liked without negotiation. I went to the opera because I had always wanted to, and Margaret had called it pretentious. I hired a trainer. I joined a hiking group. I learned that friendships require maintenance, and that Margaret had quietly allowed many of ours to die because isolation makes deception easier. 2 years after sentencing, I met Sarah on a hike in the Hudson Valley. She was an architect, divorced, direct in the way people become after surviving elegant lies. Her ex-husband had hidden gambling debts and affairs behind charms so polished that even his apologies sounded designed. We became friends first because neither of us trusted attraction. Coffee after hikes, then dinner, then long walks through the city where we spoke with the caution of people who knew love could be used as a credential to enter rooms where theft happened. When I told her about Margaret, I told it plainly. The app, the decoy, Paris, the messages, the trial. She listened without turning it into entertainment. "She wanted you to watch," Sarah said when I finished. "Yes, that is the part that stays." I looked at her. "The cruelty after the crime," she said. "The need to make you conscious of being harmed." I felt something in my chest loosen painfully. "Yes, Margaret wrote letters from prison. At first they were angry, then legal, then spiritual, then sentimental. She asked for commissary money, help with appeals, a statement supporting reduced sentencing, forgiveness. In one letter she wrote that prison had stripped her down to truth, and that she still loved me. I read it twice, then placed it in a file with the others. Not because I cherished it, because documentation had become a habit I could no longer unlearn. Sarah read one letter months into our relationship. She handed it back carefully. "She still writes as if your mercy belongs to her." "Yes, does it?" "No." I thought that answer would feel cruel. It felt clean. Years passed, but the ending never became simple. Margaret remained in federal prison, then later became a woman with a felony record, debt, limited prospects, and no access to me. James disappeared into whatever lives men like him build after immunity. The house in Westfield filled with another family's noise. My apartment filled slowly with books, light, music, and eventually Sarah's spare coat by the door. I did build a new life, but it was not the life motivational stories pretend appears after betrayal. I did not become carefree. I became exact. I read documents twice. I never shared passwords casually. I trusted Sarah because she earned trust slowly, and because she never asked me to confuse trust with blindness. The permanent change was not bitterness. Bitterness is hot and repetitive. What remained in me was colder knowledge. I knew that a person could sleep beside you and wait for midnight. I knew that affection could become reconnaissance. I knew that some betrayals are not eruptions but projects. I knew that the desire to humiliate often exposes what greed tries to hide. I knew that the moment Margaret sent the first mocking photograph, she believed she had become free. In truth, she had only begun writing the record of her own cage. Sometimes in the early morning, when Central Park is still grey and the city has not fully decided to wake, I make coffee and stand by the window. The apartment is quiet. Sarah may still be asleep. The glass reflects an older man than the one Margaret tried to destroy, but not a ruined one. Just changed. I think of the bedroom in Westfield, the blue phone glow, her careful fingers, the smile she thought no one saw. I think of how close I came to sleeping through the beginning of my own erasure. Then I look at the city, alive and indifferent, and remind myself that survival is not always warm. Sometimes survival is evidence preserved. Sometimes it is a door locked. Sometimes it is the refusal to answer letters written too late. Sometimes it is letting the person who built the trap live inside it. Margaret thanked my mobile for the life she thought she stole. In the end, the phone did exactly what she wanted. It recorded everything. The strangest thing about betrayal is how much of it happens after the betrayal itself. The act may take 15 minutes at midnight, one bank transfer, one message from an airport lounge, one video from a balcony, but the real damage continues in the ordinary hours that follow. It enters the kitchen when you reach for 2 mugs, and remember one is no longer yours to fill. It enters the closet when you find a scarf still hanging beside your coats, and cannot decide whether touching it would be grief or contamination. It enters the way people look at you after the story becomes public, with pity they try to disguise as discretion. It enters your own memory, which becomes unreliable not because the facts change, but because every good moment demands re-examination. I spent months after Margaret's arrest walking through 22 years, with a flashlight, opening drawers I had thought were empty, finding hidden compartments in scenes I once called happy. There was the 10th anniversary dinner when she cried during dessert and said she felt invisible. I had reached across the table, ashamed of my hours, promising to slow down after the quarter closed. Now I wondered whether James had already existed then, or someone before James, or whether her tears had been real and later hardened into permission. There was the summer she insisted we upgrade the kitchen even though I wanted to save the money. She had said a beautiful home made a marriage feel respected. I had agreed because I wanted peace, and because peace had become a subscription I paid without seeing the invoice. There were the small disappearances, the weekends with her sister that her sister later could not remember in detail, the cash withdrawals explained as gifts, the sudden password questions wrapped in jokes about preparedness. Each memory did not prove a crime. That was the cruelty. Most of life remains circumstantial. You cannot indict a marriage on tone. You can only realize too late that tone was testimony. My attorney, Lydia Chen, told me during the pretrial months that I needed to separate emotional truth from legal truth. Legal truth required dates, records, messages, witnesses, timestamps. Emotional truth required surviving the night after reading a letter in which Margaret described missing our old breakfasts as if she had not weaponized them. Lydia was precise, compact, and more patient with me than I deserved. She had helped design the decoy structure after Eli discovered the spyware, and she had insisted every action be defensive, documented, and reviewed. You are not punishing her, Lydia told me the first time I asked whether we were going too far. You are preserving the evidence of what she is choosing to do. That distinction mattered legally. It did not always help emotionally. During discovery, we learned that Margaret had searched phrases that made my blood go quiet. How to hide money before divorce. Can spouse track international wire transfers? Spy app banking password capture. Countries with no extradition for financial crimes, which, like much of her research, was more dramatic than competent. She had searched luxury apartments in Lisbon, villas in Tuscany, long-term Paris rentals, private banking for foreign residents. She had also searched how to make husband look financially abusive. That one stayed with me longer than the others, because it revealed a second plan beneath the first. If I fought, she intended to recast the crime as escape. If I exposed the theft, she would describe herself as fleeing control. She had prepared not only to rob me, but to narrate my objection as abuse. That realization did something to me that the money alone had not. It made me afraid retroactively, afraid of conversations we had already had, because I wondered how they might have been stored and reshaped, afraid of my own frustration during arguments, because had she been collecting moments, waiting to place them in a different frame, afraid of how easily a calm man can become a villain if the first storyteller is shameless enough. Lydia reminded me that evidence mattered. Sarah later would remind me that fear also mattered, not because it was always accurate, but because it showed where the attack had landed. Margaret's first letters from detention were full of accusation. She wrote that I had humiliated her, that I had engineered her downfall, that no loving husband would let his wife be arrested in front of neighbors. She wrote that James had manipulated her, and that I was using her weakness to appear noble. She wrote that I cared more about being right than about 22 years of marriage. I did not answer. Lydia told me not to. The prosecutor told me not to. My own hands wanted to, not to comfort her, but to correct the record line by line, as if a woman who toasted my ruin from Paris would suddenly become fair when confronted with a better paragraph. Silence was harder than argument. Silence left me alone with the fact that she might believe her own lies. It also left her alone with them. That was better. The divorce finalized before sentencing. The hearing was brief, almost insulting in its efficiency. After everything, after 22 years of shared address, shared accounts, shared holidays, shared funerals, shared beds, shared illnesses, shared grocery lists, a judge dissolved the marriage in minutes. Irreconcilable differences sounded absurdly polite. Fraud sounded closer. Predation closer still. But the law has its own language, and sometimes survival requires letting inadequate words perform necessary work. When I walked out of that courtroom divorced, I expected freedom. Instead, I felt a blank space where an identity had been. Husband is a word that grows into your daily posture. Losing it, even when the marriage deserves burial, leaves the body reaching for a weight no longer there. I went to the Westfield house afterward and sat on the stairs. The afternoon light fell through the front windows onto dust suspended in the air. Agents had taken devices months before. Lawyers had taken copies of documents. Movers had not yet come. The house felt paused. I sat halfway up the staircase and remembered Margaret standing at the bottom years earlier holding paint swatches, laughing because I could not tell ivory from cream. That laugh had been real, I think, or maybe I need it to have been real, because otherwise 22 years becomes too empty to carry. I have learned not to demand certainty from every memory. Some memories remain sealed, not exonerated, just sealed because opening them produces no useful evidence and too much blood. Selling the house was less a decision than an amputation. The realtor suggested staging. I refused. She suggested removing personal items. I agreed. The day I packed the bedroom, I found the old anniversary cards Margaret had saved in a ribboned box. Mine to her, hers to me. Her early handwriting had been larger, rounder, warmer. Henry, I still cannot believe I get to build a life with you. Henry, thank you for making ordinary days feel safe. Henry, I love the way you believe in steady things. I sat on the floor reading until the room blurred. Then I put the cards back in the box and sealed it with tape. I did not throw them away. I did not keep them in the apartment either. They went into storage with other artifacts from a country that no longer existed. At work, people were kind in the useless ways available to colleagues. They said I looked well. They said I seemed focused. They avoided Margaret's name, then occasionally failed and apologized too much. David, who had known me for 15 years, took me to lunch and ordered for both of us because I had been staring at the menu without seeing it. You know, he said, some of us suspected something was wrong at home. I looked at him sharply. He raised both hands. Not this, God, not this. But you were always tense before leaving, like you were bracing for weather. I almost denied it. Then I remembered the train rides home, the way my shoulders tightened as Westfield approached, the tiny calculations before opening the front door. What mood would she be in? Which version of the house would I enter? Which sentence would become a fight? I had called that marriage. David had called it weather. Both were true. The promotion came later, and people treated it like victory. Senior partner, larger office, more control, congratulations emails. A dinner I attended because declining would have made the achievement feel contaminated. During the toast, someone said adversity reveals character. I smiled because that is what people expect from the man being toasted. But inwardly I thought adversity reveals paperwork. Character is what you do after you read it. The hiking group saved me in a way therapy did not, though therapy helped too. Therapy gave language. Hiking gave movement. On those Saturday mornings, the Hudson Valley did not care about federal charges or divorce decrees. The trail asked only whether I could put one foot in front of the other, whether I had brought enough water, whether I could climb without turning every breath into a metaphor. The group was loose, practical, made of people old enough to have histories and polite enough not to demand them immediately. We talked about weather, boots, bad knees, restaurants, books, subway delays. It was a relief to be boring among strangers. Sarah arrived in October, wearing a faded green jacket and carrying a thermos of coffee strong enough to frighten sleep out of the dead. She did not introduce herself with charm. She arrived late, apologized once, then kept pace better than half the group. At the overlook, while others took photos, she stood beside me looking at the river and said, "Cities make more sense from a distance." I said, "So do people." She laughed, not because it was funny exactly, but because it was true. That was the beginning. She told me about her divorce on our fourth hike, not as confession but as context. Her ex-husband had been charming, brilliant, beloved at parties, and financially hollowed out by gambling debts. He hid behind refinanced loans and false optimism. The affairs were almost easier to understand, she said, stepping over a root. Desire is messy, but the money lies were architectural. He built rooms inside rooms and made me live in the outer one. I stopped walking for half a second because the sentence struck too close. She noticed but did not ask. That was one of the first reasons I trusted her. When our friendship became something more, it did so cautiously. Adults with scar tissue do not fall the way children do. They test railings, they check weather, they learn where the exits are, and then feel ashamed for needing them. The first time Sarah came to my apartment, she stood by the windows and said, "This is beautiful." Then after a pause, "Does it feel like yours?" No one had asked me that. I answered honestly, "Not yet." She nodded. "It will." She did not add, "if you let me." She did not make herself the solution. She simply stood beside me in the light. When she read Margaret's later letters, she understood why I kept them. "Proof," she said, "not for court anymore. For you." I nodded. The letters had changed by then. Margaret wrote about prison routines, about women she met, about regret. Sometimes she sounded lucid, sometimes manipulative, sometimes both in the same paragraph. She wrote that she missed the smell of our old laundry detergent. She wrote that she dreamed of Westfield. She wrote that James had been a parasite, and that she had been lonely enough to mistake being wanted for being loved. She wrote that I could not understand what it felt like to become invisible in a marriage. That line made me sit down, because somewhere inside the manipulation might have been a shard of truth. I had worked too much. I had been tired often. I had assumed stability was affection. But truth used as a tool is still a tool. Her loneliness did not install the app. Her loneliness did not make the transfers. Her loneliness did not send the video. I never answered, not once. There are people who call that cold. They are usually people who have never seen remorse arrive carrying an invoice. The last letter I received before her parole eligibility review was thinner than the others. She wrote that she no longer expected forgiveness. She wrote that she had begun teaching basic financial literacy to other inmates, a detail so strange I almost laughed and then did not. She wrote that every class forced her to say words like accountability and consequences until they stopped sounding like punishments and started sounding like weather. She wrote that if she could go back to the night she touched my phone, she would put it down and wake me instead. I read that sentence many times. Then I placed the letter in the file. Sarah asked if I believed her. I believe she wishes the outcome were different. That is not the same. No. Do you wish you could forgive her? I looked out at the park, winter bare and silver below. I wish forgiveness were not always described as the final proof of healing. Sarah sat with that. Then she said, "Maybe not answering is the shape your healing takes. Maybe. The truth is less elegant. Some doors remain closed because opening them would serve only the person knocking. Margaret had taken enough service from me. Now, years later, when I tell this story, people often focus on the twist, the decoy account, the phantom money, the wife who stole funds that were not what she thought they were. They enjoy the reversal, the neatness of the trap, the satisfaction of arrogance becoming evidence. I understand that impulse. I have felt it too on good days, when the memory is far enough away to look like justice instead of anatomy. But that is not the center of the story. The center is a man lying motionless in a dark bedroom, watching the person he trusts most lower the brightness on his phone so betrayal will not wake him. Everything after that is consequence. The app, the bank data, the Paris trip, the mocking texts, the arrest, the trial, the sentence, the apartment, Sarah, the letters, the silence. All of it radiates from that one blue-lit moment when I learned that intimacy without loyalty is just access. If there is a lesson, it is not that revenge is sweet. Revenge is too small a word for what happened. I did not want Margaret destroyed when I first saw the phone in her hands. I wanted the universe to rewind 15 minutes. I wanted to sleep honestly beside my wife. I wanted breakfast to mean breakfast. By the time consequences came, sweetness had nothing to do with it. What I felt was not joy. It was alignment. Facts matching outcome. Evidence meeting judgment. A crooked line pulled straight. And if there is an ending, it is this. I live in light now. Not metaphorical light, though perhaps that too. Real light. Morning light through tall windows. Afternoon light on wood floors. City light glittering after rain. I leave my phone wherever I want, not because I am naive, but because trust in my home has been rebuilt with someone who understands what it costs. Sarah knows my passwords are mine. I know hers are hers. We share what is needed and ask before entering what is private. That sounds unromantic only to people who confuse invasion with closeness. Sometimes Margaret's name appears in my mind without pain, just fact. Sometimes pain comes anyway. Sometimes I remember her humming yesterday over scrambled eggs, and cannot reconcile that woman with the woman in Paris, raising a glass to my ruin. Perhaps both existed. Perhaps that is the hardest truth. People are rarely only the worst thing they did, but sometimes the worst thing they did is enough to decide the rest. I survived Margaret. That is not the same as winning. Winning suggests a game. There was no game. There was a marriage, a phone, a theft, a file of evidence, and a long road back to myself. I am still walking it.